Good afternoon, Patriots. This is Bill Zedler with the Zedler Report, and I am joined today with my trusty co-host here, Mr. Josh Finkenbinder.
It's like it's rolling off your tongue there.
That's right. Josh, great to have you with me today, and thank you again for all your help on this. And let me tell you, folks, without Josh, I'd just be out there talking on the sidewalk. So I thought when we got together today that what we'd deal with is what I see going on, first of all, with the media, and second of all, with the Democrats. And because this is so typical, and yet a lot of times I think we need to be reminded of their tactics here. And the thing that really spurred me on today was I read the editorial piece in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram about Tony Tinderholt. And, I thought, is this not typical of these people? First of all, let me tell you, friends, I have been heavily involved in politics since 1976 when Ronald Reagan first ran. And what I've seen is just a continuation of a pattern. And here's what the pattern is. If we believe that the Republican's going to win, we'll go ahead and we'll endorse the Republican. But if there's even somewhat of a chance that the Democrat can win, we will demagogue the Republican and then do everything we can to praise the Democrat. And that's exactly what they've done here. First and foremost, you know how the Democrats always want to say, well, you know what? Don't be a single issue voter. Now typically, that's they're saying that when somebody is out there being pro-life. The one difference is this: we have to remember that the sanctity of human life is the number one responsibility of the government. In other words, when our founding fathers said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that we're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are, what's the first one? Life." And so there's no doubt about it. Then you say, well, that is preeminent. But the Democrats always want to say, well, don't be a single issue voter now. And yet, this is exactly what the Star-Telegram has done. And quite frankly, that's what Tony Tinderholt's opponent, Democrat opponent, has done, is they honed in on one sentence that Tony Tinderholt said at one meeting. And then what they've done is they've shot off into outer space with it. And what he said was, when he was dealing with border security, I think we should go across the border and stop it. And what he was talking about was all the gun running and all the drug trafficking. In fact, the Texas Homeland Security has said that the drug cartels own every square inch on the other side of the border. So what the point is this. Notice that they simply don't go, and instead of taking one thing he may have said at one meeting, and of course what they do is they said, oh, he wants to invade Mexico. No, not really. Basically they take off on that one little sentence he said, instead of looking at Tony Tinderholt's issues page on his website. Here's what that one says. Both Washington, D.C. and Austin have failed the people of Texas when it comes to making our border safe. I spent years in the United States Air Force engaged in counter-drug missions aimed at stopping the tide of illicit drugs from south of the border and a myriad of criminal operations that accompany. This issue is not just a question of immigration, of illegal immigration, but one of national security and protecting the dignity of human life. Every day, listen to this, folks, every day, innocent men, women, and children are caught up in people smuggling as well as sex and drug trafficking operations across our border with Mexico. The federal government purposely turns a blind eye to this unacceptable situation. As your state representative, it will be my constitutional duty to protect all Texans by arming our state agencies and Border Patrol with the technology and manpower required to protect innocent lives. Now, you know, I would bet you if you ran that past all the people of Texas, I bet you a good 70 to 80% of them would say, Tony Tinderholt, right on. We agree with you. But what the Star-Telegram has done is taken one sentence that he said at one event and shot right off into outer space with it. And of course, so has his opponent. But let me tell you, friends, this is nothing new. In fact, let me give you one of my experiences I had with them, where what we ran into is if they can't find something to go after you about, they simply make it up. And I'll give you a prime example. When I was running for re-election as a state representative in 2008, I was with the Texas Conservative Coalition. And one of the goals of the Texas Conservative Coalition was to buy down the school property tax rate. Bud Kennedy with the Star-Telegram calls me up and he says, well, how do you plan to buy down the school property tax rate? And I said, good question, Bud. Here's the way I plan to do it. First and foremost, we limit the growth of government to population plus inflation. Friends, do you know that has been a goal that's been put in the platform of the Republican Party for some time? Unfortunately, under the current leadership of Joe Strauss, that bill didn't even get a hearing last time. But let's not get off topic here. And so I said we need to limit the growth of government to population plus inflation and take the surpluses that will come along over a period of time, and instead of using that surplus to grow government, let's use that surplus to buy down the school property tax rate. Had we done that 20 years ago, listen to this, had we done it 20 years ago, your property taxes would be zero except for the bonded indebtedness that you had an opportunity to vote on. So that was my plan. Bud Kennedy then says, he asked me, he said, well, what do you think about raising the sales tax to buy down the school property tax rate? I then proceeded to tell Bud why I didn't think that was such a good idea and that we didn't need to do that. That again, my idea, what we need to do is go with that first. Guess what Bud Kennedy puts in the Star-Telegram? Bud Kennedy in the Star-Telegram, big headlines. Bill Zedler supports a 14-cent sales tax. And then under that, to buy down the school property tax rate. Well, you see, that wasn't my plan. That was Bud's plan. But he didn't bother to tell the readers of that. In fact, later when I called him up and said, Bud, why did you put that in the paper? And he said, well, I didn't think your plan would work, and eventually it would lead to this. And I said, well, Bud, you had every right to say that. The deal is you didn't. You didn't say, I don't think this would work, and therefore we'd have to rely on raising the sales tax. Instead, he said it was my idea when it was his idea. So there we have an instance where if they cannot find something to go after you about, in essence what they do is they make it up. Again, what the other thing is that you'll look through the editorial and they use a lot of words like extreme with, like for instance, Arlington voters in Texas House District 94 race should reject Republican candidates' extreme views. Let me tell you, friends, they said the same thing about me when I first ran. And they did say it a little bit differently. They said Bill Zedler has some well thought out views about taxation. Listen to this though, with some extreme, you recognize that word? Some extreme philosophical and religious views. Now, let me tell you what my philosophical and religious views are, friend. And at the time I went back and said, well, let's see, my philosophical views are like that one guy, Ronald Reagan. Now, we know what an extremist he was. The fact is that he got almost 70% of the vote when he ran for president. I guess that's not all that extreme. But, you know, here was the thing. All the time he was running for election in 1980, that's the terminology they used about him. Extreme, they said, extreme right. They called him the very conservative, that kind of thing. In other words, everything that was kind of over the edge. He wasn't just a conservative. He was a extreme conservative and that kind of thing. So they used the same thing on Ronald Reagan. And then I said, my philosophical views are exactly like Ronald Reagan's, and my religious views are like that other extremist, Billy Graham. So what we have is they never, ever say what is extreme about what you believe. Because you know what? They'll either distort it or they'll not mention it at all. And that's exactly what they did with me. With me, they never said what was extreme about my views. They just threw the term out there. And here's what I see over and over and over again. They follow that same method, that same MO. Now, let me ask you this. Do you recognize that? If you don't, let me tell you where it comes from. It comes right out of the pages of Saul Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals. And in Saul Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals, they say, do not debate the issue. You make the individual the issue. You don't debate the issues. You, essence, target the individual and make them the issue. And that's exactly what they've done with Tony Tinderholt. And that's exactly what they're doing with a lot of other Republicans. And I'll give you another example in just a minute. With Tony Tinderholt, let me tell you, friends, he's a 21-year veteran. In other words, he was in the military for 21 years, achieved the rank of major. If you look at some of the things he did while he was in the military, it shows somebody who was an exceptional individual. And what we have is an opponent of his that has no military service. The other thing is this. Why don't we start looking at some of the positions of his opponent? For instance, his opponent, he supports the ACA. Do you know what that is? The Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act is Obamacare. Now, to me, that tells me volumes. That tells me all I need to know about his opponent, and I'll tell you why. People who support the Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act basically believe that can give you a very good insight into their belief system. He believes in big government down, top down programs. Now, there's only one problem with it. They simply do not work. And what we are really seeing that as they roll out Obamacare, the deal is they've tried to curtail a lot of the real problems with it. They've delayed them because they said that they finally learned what was in the bill after they passed it, and so the end result is they are finding all these problems with it. Let me tell you, friends, I've worked in the medical industry for 33 years. Government-run, top-down programs that deal in health and that kind of stuff, simply they haven't worked anywhere else in the world, and they're not going to work here. The only thing that will work is get back to the principles of free enterprise, making sure that the patient and the doctor are engaged in what it costs to deliver the health care and that kind of thing. What we ought to do is, instead of going with a big government-run, top-down program in health care, and let me add one other thing. When I was in the medical industry, I used to travel the Northeast because a lot of times we'll hear, well, why, you know, they have a great program up in Canada. Why, do you know every person in Canada has health insurance? Well, they sure do. There's only one problem. They may have health insurance, but, you know, that doesn't mean they have health care. And let me tell you exactly what I mean. Now, if you break your arm, oh yeah, you'll be able to go to the doctor and you'll go to the emergency room and they'll fix it. But what happens if you go to the doctor and you have a headache? The doctor says, well, you know what, you could have a brain tumor. Well, we're going to have to send you to have an MRI. Well, there's only one problem, friends. If you want to have an MRI in Canada, because of their nationalized health insurance, guess what? You may be waiting 10 to 12 months. And so guess what a lot of Canadians would do? A lot of Canadians would come across the border. They would pay American hospital or American health facility the money to have an MRI. They would then take the results back to their doctor. The doctor would look at the results, and if he'd say, you know what, gee whiz, you do have a brain tumor. Then what would happen is they would come back, and he would say, and guess what? You're going to have to wait for another 10 to 12 months to have a neurosurgeon take care of that brain tumor. My friends, you know what? If you have a brain tumor and you've waited 20 to 24 months, in all probability, you won't be living long. And that is why you see that when it comes to those kinds of illnesses, America ranks at the top, and all these other countries that have all these nationalized health programs, they rank way down the list. Because the only way they can control cost in that kind of environment is to simply deny health care. They ration it. And the end result is you are the victim. So, my friends, let's make it abundantly clear. Simply because you will get health insurance, that doesn't mean you will have health care. I'm hearing numerous cases where the deductible under Obamacare has gone up dramatically. Oh, yeah, you're going to have health insurance if you ever spent $10,000 to finally have them cover it. But if you haven't spent $10,000, you will spend every penny that it will take to get the health care, all on your own. Whereas, if you look at the people who have gotten into healthcare savings accounts, guess what? They've found that healthcare savings accounts help drive down the cost of medicine. And the end result is that over the long haul, it'll actually drive down the cost of health insurance. But instead, we have a party, the Democratic Party, that believes in big government. And make no mistake about it, this issue is not about delivering health care. This issue is about control. They will control your life because, in essence, they will be the ones who will determine who gets health care and who does not. So quite frankly, that tells me everything I need to know about Tony Tinderholt's opponent. He's a big government, government-run, top-down believer. Whereas Tony Tinderholt believes in the principles of free enterprise, limited government, limited taxes, and family values. And you know what, my friends? When you put the principles of free enterprise into a situation, into the market of ideas, and then into the market, guess what? It always drives up quality and drives down cost. It works every time. For everybody, exactly. And so the end result is we need to look at that. And here, the other thing that is a big difference is Tony Tinderholt's opponent wants to expand Medicaid because he said, well, gee, the government's going to pay for 100% of it. For right now, here's the problem. Once you get people on here on this Medicaid expansion, guess what? Very often you've taken them off of some programs that they could afford and put them onto a program that virtually costs them nothing. But here's the other thing. More and more doctors out there are refusing to take Medicaid. You know why? Because the reimbursement rates are way down. The other thing is this. It is getting more and more difficult to get reimbursed. All the paperwork that they have to fill out and that kind of thing, they don't want to do it. And so as you narrow down the field of healthcare providers, what do you think is going to happen then? So, but the other thing is this. In fact, let me share one other thing. with another race, Ken Paxton. Ken Paxton, there was an article in the Dallas Morning News about Ken Paxton. Ken Paxton is a Republican who's running for state attorney general to replace Greg Abbott. And they want to bring up an old issue, and that was where Ken Paxton basically paid an administrative fine for failing to register as a lobbyist in one particular case. And so he was fined, and he paid the fine, and is going on with it. Here's the thing. The one thing I want you to understand is that it's just like when I ran into a problem with the Texas Ethics Commission. I had my campaign was called the Friends of Bill Zedler. If you wanted to make a contribution to Bill Zedler, you made it to the Friends of Bill Zedler. And so for years I had that. I ran against Republicans. I ran against Democrats, had that Friends of Bill Zedler on my campaign account. No problem. All of a sudden, I had, when I was in a campaign against Chris Turner, a very liberal Democrat, in the fall election. In fact, they had Acorn working on his campaign, helping him out and that kind of thing. They looked at and they said, well, we believe Friends of Bill Zedler could be a PAC. Simply by nature of its name. We believe it could be a PAC. And so, in essence, the Texas Ethics Commission said, well, we're going to fine you. We're going to fine you because, well, we believe it could be a PAC. Now, here's the thing. I had never operated it as a PAC. It always operated as a campaign account. Nonetheless, I went ahead and paid the fine. Why? Because one of those things where it was going to cost me a whole lot more not to pay the fine, but it'd try and take it into court. And so the end result was I went ahead and paid the fine. And it gets down to one other thing that I see, and what you might see written about, is the over-criminalization that is going on in our society. Do you realize that when this nation was founded, there were 3 federal felonies? 3 federal felonies. Today, there are about 2,200 federal felonies. In fact, there's a number of authors that have come out with books that have said, today in America, every American commits 3 felonies because of the over-criminalization, where we're criminalizing everything that goes on. And what we had was Ken Paxton fell victim to do this. The other thing they tried was another hit piece on him, and what they were trying to do, there were a number of state legislators, including myself, that we were involved with an energy trading company. There was an individual who had found the company, gotten involved. He had gotten majority interest, and so then he got into encouraging others people to come and get involved in it, believing that the more money that was involved in the trading, that it will allow us to get a larger share of the energy market. And so there was more and more of us that were involved. I didn't know it at the time, but Ken Paxton was in, but Phil King and Wayne Christian and myself, had gotten in. And what it boils down to is this. It was clear to me that what happened was they were trying to make it like Ken Paxton had enticed us to come into it. And, And in essence, that's not what happened. I didn't even know Ken Paxton was involved until later on. And so when they realized they couldn't pin that little deal on him, they said, well, let's go a different route. And so they called me up and they said, they asked me about it, and I gave them some information on it. And then what they said was, the reporter that had me on the phone said, well, did you know that the person who had founded this or who had become principal controller of the company, did you know he claimed to have found Noah's Ark? What my response was no, I didn't realize that. But that I do remember him giving me a DVD on a journey to Mount Ararat, but I never remember him saying that he had found Noah's Ark. Now, so I was just simply going on based on what the reporter had told me. Well, guess what? Notice both at the beginning and the end, I had said he never told me anything about finding Noah's Ark. Well, in the paper they said that this guy had claimed to have found Noah's Ark, and Zedler said what he said to me was that he was in the Mount Ararat region and they had come up with some stuff, and he'd given me a DVD. Now, I don't even remember with some stuff. I remember him saying that he'd gone into the Mount Ararat, and that's what I had said to the reporter. The whole point is that then they added up with a little shot from somebody who was totally other than making the shot in about, they must have gotten a hole in their ark and the ark sunk. And so they basically took the information and printed only that part that they wanted to hear and made it sound like, well, gee whiz, we were easily duped because of that. So they did it in the Dallas Morning News, where you have reporters who are, quite frankly, unwilling to be forthright in what they're doing.
Well, that's putting it nicely.
Exactly. The other thing is this. Tony, when you're driving around and looking at yard signs or these 4x4s, you will see the Republicans, they have Republican in there. But have you noticed that there's a lot of yard signs, a lot of 4x4s and 4x8s? All it has is the guy's name or the woman's name. Not one little bit about party affiliation. In fact, if you go to these Democrat Party candidates' websites, guess what? There's nothing about Democrat Party on there either. It's like these people are running from the Democrat moniker. Now, I wonder why that would be, Tony. So, it's amazing that they will do that. So I think that the reason is clear. The reason is that they don't want to acknowledge that they are Democrats. They don't want people to know it. They want to sound like, well, they're just somebody else. Maybe they're an independent or something like that. They don't want people to know. But here's the thing. Josh, do you have any idea how much of their funding will come from Democrat operatives?
Well, I could take a guess. Most of it.
I think you're right. And the fact is that somebody who's going to be throwing a whole lot of money into all these Democrat candidates' coffers, they will be trial lawyers. Because ultimately, that's one of their goals, is to wrestle the legislature away from the Republicans so they can go back to making huge amounts of money by suing people. And so the fact is they will continue to use Democrat resources. The other thing is they will continue to have Democrat positions. I looked at some of them. They all support the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. They all support the increase in the minimum wage. Now, friends, let's make something abundantly clear. When they say, well, everybody deserves to have a living wage. Here's the thing. We're going to have the government involved in artificially raising the minimum wage. And in essence, they said, because it's got to have a living wage. It is not designed to be, quote unquote, a living wage. It is designed to be an entry-level job that you get paid for. And the vast majority of these people are very young. I mean, we're talking about 90% of them that are getting minimum wage are the very young. They're typically high school and college students, that they are using this job as an entry-level job. They're not going to be there the rest of their life. What they want to do is move up the ladder. And what you will find is that as they gain experience, guess what? They earn more money. But here's the other thing. Ultimately, that will not work. You know, the best way to get the wages up is get the economy turned loose. If we can simply unleash these government shackles from the economy, this economy will take off like a rocket. And all you need to do is go into those areas where the oil industry is really booming. Go to Midland, Odessa. Go to North Dakota. And guess what? My friends, hamburger flippers out there are making $10 and $15 an hour. Why? Because the economy's going great guns. They're competing for limited labor resources, and the end result is the price of labor goes up. So therein is the way we solve those problems. We will not solve it by government mandates. We need to do what every good conservative has done and has found to work in the past. Get the government off the back of these businesses and let the economy take off like a rocket, and guess what? It will take us with it. Well, that's it for today, friends. God bless you, and you have a wonderful day.